My guest this week is Angela Jaeger. Angela is a singer, writer, and teacher who founded the late 70s no-wave band The Stair Kids and has recorded with Pigbag, Bush TETRAS, Trevor Horn, David Cunningham, and the Monochrome Set, amongst others. A born and bred New Yorker who has lived in Barcelona and London, she currently resides in Brooklyn, and her published book of punk journals, I Feel Famous, Punk Diaries, 1977 to 1981, has just been published by Hat and Beard Press. And it gives me great pleasure to welcome the Revolutions Per Movie, Angela Jaeger. Hi, Angela.
Hi, Chris. How are you doing?
I am so excited to talk to you because I related to your book so much. I Feel Famous, Punk Diaries, 1977 to 1981. I did not grow up in New York and was not traveling to the UK back and forth, experiencing everything you did. But your writing really spoke to me because I too kept a journal and wrote down all my fears and frustrations and trying to immerse myself in an underground music and art culture. But I threw it all away because I was terrified someone would find it. You kept all this incredible artwork and writing. So before I get into the tonality of the book, where were you storing all this stuff all these years? Like, did you ever at any point be like, I gotta let go of this?
At this point now in my life, that would definitely be a um, a consideration. But for a long time, because I was moving back and forth and between living in London for 8 years and living in Barcelona later for 10 years, a lot of my stuff from my teens, um, and certainly the diaries, that was all in tubs in my dad's basement upstate. So it was kind of there. I lived when I was living overseas, I lived just with, I didn't bring stuff.
Yeah, but was any of this stuff in your past radiating? Could you tell that like I have this there? Did you think about it much?
I didn't think about it too much to begin with. I would say around 2000, year 2000, I started to think about particularly the diaries. Of course, there were diaries from years before and since. I don't keep a diary that much now, but um, or a journal. We'll say a little more mature word.
Well, when you put punk in front of a diary, it sounds great though.
Yeah, and teenage girl. Um,
Exactly.
so I basically started to think that there could be interest in this, and I knew that what I had was not just written diaries, there were drawings, and there was ephemera, things I'd collected, flyers and all of that. And so I never really thought, get rid of that. And I I'm still holding on to it. Although I am going to go through, I have to like tidy up the office area, and I thought this will be a good time to like really go through the boxes of flyers and all of that, and start to um, take photographs and catalog what really is there. Um, and of course, I've got so many endless pages and notes. I've been working on the book for a long time, so I have a lot of uh, manuscripts, and I'll be wheedling that down because nobody has room for all this stuff anymore.
Right. You got such amazing encouragement from Thurston Moore and Byron Coley of Forced Exposure, who you befriended in college. You know, were you ever hesitant to be like, oh, I don't know if this is ready for public consumption or I'll be too vulnerable? Or were you like running towards the light with this?
The encouragement of people really motivated me. From the get-go, everybody was like, "Oh, that sounds like a really interesting project, and wow, how cool,"
Mhm.
And, it's not really as if I didn't have a sense of that for myself, but it was great to have people, um, foster your belief that this should be shared. Why not? Um, it's funny because when I was doing it, and of course I did some editing, various rounds of it, um, I I questioned, how much do I want to share? Like, how intimate is this? Or how absurd is it? Or ridiculous? Or like, am I putting myself out there too much as this kind of person? Or, but I felt pretty confident of who I was at the time, even in a balanced sense of being insecure and as teenage quest for identity. And but it's interesting, since the book came out, it does feel a, a little more like, ooh, I have opened this story that happened 50 years ago. So it's an interesting thing to reconcile.
Well, and also when you're writing in real time, there's a great section in the book where you're hanging with Joe Strummer for the night, and then you're like, I'm kind of writing it in case if my mom ever discovers this diary, I don't want her to be upset. You're kind of like already self-editing for a different audience.
Hmm.
So like when you're writing this, who was your audience? Were you talking to like a future self? Were you talking to yourself in the present? Who did you imagine?
I was writing it for myself. I was writing it so that I could remember, because I did have a sense that I would look back at these stories about seeing bands and um, being exposed to a really marvelous group of people and culture that was so new and vibrant that I I had a sense, yeah, I gotta get this down for me, um, because I really wasn't telling people I keep a diary. No, I was just doing it. I mean, my sister knew because she would also make notes, and the two of us would go out together. So, and I think my brother, he knew because he was like, oh, those girls at their diaries again. It's interesting. I mean, up to now, with this whole the New York scene, I haven't come across so many diaries. I mean, Duncan Hannah wrote a fantastic book. I love 20th Century Boy, but I really haven't. And not to mention girls. I mean, there's memoirs, there's historic books looking back, and there are more all the time. Um, but I really, I haven't come across so many diaries.
I love the book because you are a teenager. Can I read one excerpt to you? Or is it okay if I do that?
It's okay.
So, June 27th, 1977. I put some more makeup on last night and stood in front of the mirror, imagining myself to be a punk and admiring this dingy self very much, a rope tied in a bow around my neck. Now, when I think of it, it makes me sick to a certain extent. I feel sinful and vain and wonder where my head is at. It's disturbing. I rationalize it by thinking I was bored, but what's going on here? Pages are right about the rock scene. It's funny and stupid. A lot of mixed feelings of what I want to be, the Angela we all know, or somebody different, and who shall that be? On the phone, Mom said, I would rather you be a Blondie fan than the likes of a British punk. And to me, like, that is such a beautiful paragraph. I know you from reading that. I'm like, I, I would have been chasing you down as a friend. Like, I got to know her because she's kind of me.
Wow, those was so much fun to hear you read that. I really enjoyed that.
Oh,
Um,
thanks.
it's great to hear somebody else read the words.
I feel it. The book is powerful, Angela.
Oh, thank you. That actual, yeah, it sort of says it all, really. I opened the book to have a peek, but um, yes, I was in my mind going back and forth, sort of tiptoeing into something and then stepping back, and then in the privacy of my own world, standing in front of the mirror and, can I be um, this punk personality? Or and I was young, you know, um, 16, 17 years old, feeling a little bit. no, aware that music was changing. So I was aware of this through buying magazines, and I was playing in a cover band in high school at the time, and that was doing pretty well. But we were doing like 60s standards, and it just was the right moment. But it didn't just like happen like that. It kind of happened fast, but it was also slow. And I was, as much as I was bouncing into it, I was kind of deliberate. And I knew that it was worth questioning who I was.
Yeah. Right. Well, and also in the book, early on, I think a lot of us experience, if we're wanting to go into something different or unexpected, trying to find people who will go with you. Like finding someone to be like, we got to go see the Cramps, and them being like, nah. And then by just kind of going by yourself, you find a whole new scene. You like befriend Lydia Lunch, was just the Lydia Lunch thing was really amazing in the book because she really did care for you, and you had this,
I hope so.
but you were so different. That's what I loved about it. Like Lydia was as far away in terms of the stories she was telling you about her life and her where she was currently in childhood and abuse and things like that. It was just, I don't know, it's just a really amazing glimpse into a scene that was still trying to figure itself out as well as the individuals were.
Yeah, that's right. And for me, when I think about it, as you're talking about it, and of these things, as I've written the book and um, kind of reconnected, gone back to what was it like. It's still, I see a picture, I see myself getting dressed up, I see myself walking down the Bowery alone most of the time to begin with, you know, and yes, it took a lot of nerve to do that. I was smoking cigarettes, but I'd walk in there. I didn't know a soul. And it was I was nervous, and, uh, trying to look like I was, we didn't have phones back then, but somehow I probably was like, "Oh, I'm gonna study this flyer on the wall," or do something that made me look occupied. It's like, no, it's very easy for women especially, going out alone, and, but somehow I just was driven. The music. And this is the moment. It's now. It's now. It's gotta be now, and you have to do it in this moment. So, screw your nerves or, what you have to tell your mom as you leave the door or, I don't think I was saying, "Well, I'm doing an essay on, uh, how punk has affected, the young people of today." Well, that could be another conversation, but
My first attempt to go into a punk club, it took me 3 times to get up the nerve to walk in. I chickened out twice, and I was alone because I just imagined inside that I would walk in, they would take one look at me, and they would tear my head off and feast off me and just pass my body around. I just didn't know. The third time I handed the money into this guy, Tommy Lungden was his name. Like he wasn't from Lungden, but he had a fake accent. Threw the money into his hands and walked in just without even looking at him. And then I went in and there was 9 people at the show. There's no one in it. And I just walked up front, watched the band, and then I was there all the time at this place called the 13th Precinct, an all ages club.
I love it.
But it was so funny reading your book. I really could relate to this like just changing of DNA, but also being a teenager still and not an adult and trying to figure out like where my musical alliances were. And yeah, I think that's a really exciting time that you were part of because like I want to ask you this. Were the Cramps the band you saw the most? Because it seemed like you were always seeing the Cramps and talking to the Cramps and just hanging out
Yeah,
with the Cramps.
Cramps definitely stand out as a band that I saw probably more than any other band. Um,
Amazing.
uh, Early Cramps, beginning Cramps. Um, Although I don't think I ever saw them with Miriam Lina playing drums. So that was, but I don't think they did that many shows with that. Yeah, so it was the Cramps. Who else do I think of back then? Well, and I loved the Cramps. The Dead Boys were playing all the time at CBGB, so you couldn't get too far from them. And I do remember, of course, Teenage Jesus and the Jerks and Contortions.
Yeah.
The Blessed was a band that I loved, um, with Howie Pyro,
Wow.
and those were I liked hanging out with those guys because they were young, like me, and younger than me.
And then you, like Lydia, asked you to roadie for the teenage for Teenage Jesus and the Jerks.
Yeah, she did. She came right up to me and saw me at this Village Gate show in the summer of '77, and she asked me to roadie, and I like roadie, and and meanwhile she looked amazing. I thought, wow, like this here's a real bona fide girl on the scene asking me to, even whatever she was going to approach me about. But I said, yeah, and we exchanged numbers, and I think I went to a rehearsal and kind of moved a few things around, and it was about the extent of that. Um, but yeah, we were always there, in that time capsule where everything's just jammed to the hilt.
And it seems like at this point you have an eye on what is bubbling in England, but you've also chosen to go to college for a while, and I just can't imagine having a better way of like leaving something that you're like apprehensive to leave the city when things are actually really exploding. But you meet like Emily Hubley and Byron Coley, befriend all these weirdos there. You get to see like the Suicide Commandos and wear a garbage bag to the show. I'm like, that is perfect. Like, that to me is a movie, right? In my head.
Yeah, and there's a Polaroid of me wearing that bag,
Yes.
being really, really like kind of toying with what I was seeing coming out of England, wearing a garbage bag. But it that was fantastic. And I left that in the book because I was like, obviously Byron Coley had been an important person in my life back then, but as our little group of 8 or 9 of us, and dancing like crazy at yeah, when the Suicide Commandos came,
Yeah.
that's a record when I put on today, um, match mismatch. I just it's so good. That's such a great.
Absolutely. And so, and then your first band, the Bibs, was that around this time as well when you were in
Yeah.
college?
Yeah,
Okay.
so Hampshire College was somewhat short-lived. I was there for about a year and a semester. But and this was the thing with the diaries. There is that jumping back and forth because I start college, I leave college and England. So it's a little bit of a like a bouncing ball. But uh it is what happened. And but yeah, college. So there was always the push and pull because so the summer of '77, I'm going out, seeing the Cramps and doing all this, the real kind of summer where I start to know people and going out a lot and just seeing incredible music. And then, but I've already applied for college and that's coming up in the fall.
Right.
But, it didn't stop us from having a ball. We had a great time. We did drive to Boston to see Iggy. We drove down to see Devo at Max's. 4 hours there, 4 hours back.
Meanwhile, your sister is in England, right?
Yeah, my sister was doing a overseas program in Norfolk in around, I guess, 76, 77. And so the initial part of punk, she was over there. She had written to me about seeing punks and
Uh-huh.
all of this, but she was there, and then she came back in, I think it was just right around January '78, and that was perfect because we had a chance to, go out. Of course, I was back and forth to Hampshire, but, and then we kind of just carried on, and as, it was a very, very unique period because to finally really have somebody I could enjoy it with, like, you know,
Right.
we're getting dressed up. I'm not in front of the mirror anymore, just me. Now my sister's there, and we're both, what are we going to wear tonight? What could be more fun than like getting dressed up to go out with a sister or a friend? It's the best, you know?
Oh, your family's amazing. I love when you talk about what you got for Christmas '78. You're like, I got a belt, a Cramp 7-inch. Mom gave me a Buzzcocks LP and an Advert 7-inch. Dad gave me a sweater. Will return is in quotes. But like your mom even like was putting up touring bands from overseas, like Young Marble Giants, the Raincoats. Did she understand what you were doing and like you leaving the country and coming back and all that? Was she accepting of it or was she secretly worried?
Well, I think she was kind of going through empty nest syndrome a little bit too, because my brother had already gone off to Bard College. At that point, my sister might have been home, but she was about to move out. And so yeah, she was a little worried. And mostly I think she was like, oh, I'll miss you. I mean, of course, it's she also worried about us a lot. And during that day, during that time, young girls, her daughter's going off to the Bowery alone, and but she learned to accept it. And she came down to CBGB's one night with her partner Gordon Finley, and they showed up because she was smart. She was like, I want to see what my kids are up to. So let's just go. And the Cramps were playing, and they were both in the audience just having a ball. And she loved it. She would also, say before I went out, she would say, like, come, let's have a look at you. She liked to just sit there and see
Oh,
what outfit I was gonna
oh,
wear.
that's
And,
beautiful.
there were certain things that if you I think she came to trust me, but I don't know if I was, like, always running around with a quarter in my pocket to call her, but,
Right.
once Hillary came back, it was like, okay, they're together, and my sister looked after me too. But my mom ended up putting those bands up in the apartment because my sister was had Tier 3, the club, and
Right.
Delta 5 and the Raincoats and Slits, they needed a place to stay. Plus, I had met the Slits, so already knew them, and Dick O'Dowd from Y Records.
Yeah, I love when you were over in the UK and you have recorded the Slits on a cassette player, but the cut is not out yet. And so you're
That's
you're
right.
waiting for the record and you're going into clubs singing Slit songs to anybody who will listen, but nobody knows this yet. And you're waiting for the greatest album of all time. Because the Slits are one of my favorite bands of all time. Like, just a band that completely created their own language quickly.
Yeah, that was funny, getting taping the live shows and then coming back to New York and dancing around. I remember that, the Mud Club, and that was, again, this kind of feeling like I had this sort of secret discovery,
Right.
and but, yeah, the album hadn't even come out. Um, the Slits were monumental for me too,
Yeah.
and just really creative. Like, musically, it was all outside the box. Now, there might have been certain formulas, the verse and the chorus, but you weren't so aware of that. They were just very, very interesting. And, they were still kind of fine tuning their instrumentation, so there was that beauty of a band learning at the same time as playing.
As somebody on the West Coast who just could only read about this stuff like the Mud Club, CBs, Club 57, I knew all that. I didn't know anything about Tier 3 till your book. Just reading who came through and what the room was like and the experimentation going on there, it feels like that's kind of where you got your musical punk chops up, I guess, or post punk chops up.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say the punk chops. I mean, I'd been singing in a band and had studied voice for years during high school. So it was a long time passion and practice. But absolutely, the Stairkits was like the first punk band. Not that there were many, but it was a very short-lived and beautiful little creation. Um, I'm just right now working on getting the vinyl of that concert at Tier 3 out on feeding tubes.
Oh, that's
Yeah, we're
incredible.
working on that today as um but it's yeah, that was a band that was influenced by so many of our faves. We were just absorbing it all as bands do, and we loved the Slits and Wire and Susie and the Banshees. And so it was kind of a conglomeration. But again, just learning and figuring out how to put it forward. But that was my yeah, that was a pretty amazing thing. And just to say, uh, the band members are all friends to this day. We all loved Tier 3 because it was a kind of a community of friends and family. Quite literally, the sister booked the bands, and the Stairkits. Amy Rigby was the coat check girl. Michael did all. Her brother Michael did all the flyers. Michael McMahon, and it that felt fantastic. It was also
Yeah.
not a sort of uptown kind of club or even anything like the Mud Club, which was literally around the corner, but it had a real sort of throwing together of elements, and you could play whatever music you wanted there for the most part, um, danceable or not danceable, which
Right.
is always a good thing. Like I love, we all danced up a storm, but sometimes you got to just throw on Three Penny Opera or.
Right. We will get to talk about the punk rock movie, but this is my chance to ask a few questions here. Music is moving so fast. Like within the book, within a year and a half, all of a sudden you're talking about the specials, Public Image Limited, Crass, Poison Girls, Adamant, Throbbing Gristle. Like things are just like bum, 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 bum. It's really amazing how much different and incredible music was coming out at the time. But one of my biggest thrills in getting this together to talk to you about how everything's changing was that I just discovered an episode of The Cutting Edge, which was IRS's MTV show in the early 80s, and Pigbag are on it, a band that, again, I had records and I was like, I don't know what this is. It's danceable, it's funky, but it's also perverse. And you're playing on this performance. And you said it was like shot for MTV Japan or something?
Yeah, that was I went to Japan with Pigbag actually before I was a formal member. So
Okay.
I had met them in New York, started going out with the bass player, Simon Underwood, ended up getting married. And they were going to Japan, and they said, "Do you want to come? We're going to have a vacation in Bali afterwards." And I was like, "Yeah, I'll
Oh
go."
my gosh. Wow, that's
That was
incredible.
another thing. My mom was always super supportive of, like, anything like you can't say no. And I haven't been to Japan since. I'd love to go back. And they were big in Japan. Lot of fans. And this was a little bit early on in that period where bands would play in Japan. Like, 5 years, 10 years later, everybody seemed to be going to Japan. I remember it was so humid. I remember going into like a pharmacy and I just felt kind of like the humidity was getting to me. I was trying to motion, like, do you have like a little special something I can take? Because they had all those, which now we see here, but bottles of little tinctures in the fridge.
Right. Sure. Sure. Sure.
So I was, trying to motion, headache.
I got a pig bag show to play.
Yeah,
Come on,
I need
help me out,
I
pig
need
bag.
a little pick me up here, And, then but it was fun and, it was culturally amazing and we all brought back stuff but yeah, there is, and I'm playing congas.
Yeah, it's so cool. It just came up. I'll put a link in the show notes to your book, that performance, and also various records you played on. But I was really happy that you picked this film. Look, I even have it from my video store, the punk rock movie. I have it here on VHS. Did you know Don Letts, the director, who made this film?
I bet Don Letts, I'm not sure if it was New York or London, but he was certainly around in London when I first went there in 78. But I met him properly through my friend Peter Doherty, who later did MTV Rocks. And he's no longer with us, but he was a good friend of Don Letts and The Clash and all of that too. So I'm just going to show you that because so much of the movie takes place at the Roxy, I got a copy, 100 Nights at the Roxy.
What is that?
Well, this is a great book. And luckily I have two copies because this one, the pages are falling out. This is a beautiful book. It came out in 1978.
Wow. So already they're documenting, because the Roxy literally did last like that short of a period of time, right?
December 1976 to I think maybe 4 months or 100 days.
And that's where all the early bands were just starting to, it was like a safe place for them to make music.
Yeah. And I bought this for my friend, the book
Wow.
for Marguerite, Christmas 1978, Love Angela, quote unquote, punk rocker.
Yeah, well, you still are.
Yeah.
This film is documenting stuff before you got there.
Yes.
So did you feel like I can't believe I missed this? Or were you just like, all right, I'm on to the next chapter. It's fine.
Well, my discovery of punk was parallel to what was happening in New York City, in the East Village where I grew up, where I had access and not easy access, as we talked about, getting up the nerve to just go to clubs. All of that was already a different version of punk was happening in England. And so it was looking at pictures of the Slits in Roxy magazine that just wowed me no end. And I mean, I will say, the Bromley contingent, which was, Billy Idol, Susie Sue, Debbie Juvenile, uh, Simon, I forget his last name. I mean, I, these photographs as you are when you're young, you have pictures on your walls. But I hadn't seen any movies of any of this, just the odd photo in a magazine. But I was aware of it and I was kind of fixated on it before I saw the movie, which was a sneak preview. Don Letts came to New York and it was shown in Times Square.
Wow.
Yeah, it was shown in Times Square. Back then it would have been somebody's like, oh yeah, there's this thing, they're showing a movie. And I remember a pretty big theater. I remember Billy Idol was there in the back because he was in town at that time.
Yeah, the amount of people who just show up in the US and the amount of US people that show up while you're in the UK, it's so weird. Was it weird to just be in the UK and be like, oh, Wayne County's here or David Johansen here? Did it feel weird to be like, oh yeah, my friends are here?
Well, it was certainly funny, to have that experience where New York bands, you'd see them in London, and then occasionally one or two of them, or like the Clash, might like, oh, there's that girl from New York,
Right.
like in London. that might not have been such a, a noticeable thing. But when I went to see them in places like Leeds or Coventry,
Right.
yeah, who's that New York girl? Because you're definitely not seeing anybody from New York in Coventry,
So the film plays in Times Square, and did people like freak out? Like, what do you remember the reaction in the theater at all?
I think there was a lot of kind of excitement and laughter. And back we probably were acting a bit punky even, and possibly silly, nonchalant. Like, we'd all kind of like, if you got a group of us together, we'd sort of play it out. We'd sort of act out the whole thing, whether it was, and you saw that in London too. If there, kids, I remember traveling with some British punks, and when we got up north to see travel to see the Clash, they'd start spiking their hair even more just to be like, we're for them.
Yeah, the film reminds me, it's like a Super 8 film, one camera zooming in and out. The sound is often very blown out. It reminds me a lot of the Super 8 film Blake Generation, which, captured, like Wayne County and marbles and television and talking heads really early footage. So it's like cut. A lot of it's not in sync. But, it's got a lot of bands that I've never seen visually, like Subway Sect or Slaughter and the Dogs. But then it has like, Susie, Generation X, Sex Pistols, Slits, Clash. And I think this is the best footage of the Sex Pistols I've ever seen because they are still into it. Like all the footage I've ever seen is them coming to the States, being checked out, being done. We're over it. It's kind of a joke.
Yeah.
And to see them just be a great band and Johnny Rotten be really still into it as
Yeah.
a performer is like, it's jaw dropping.
Right. And I think that footage in the movie is Sid Vicious's first.
And he's playing great. Like he's concentrating, he's looking at his hands, nothing is off. It sounds so powerful. You're like, oh yeah, they were a great band. Done. Amazing.
What's so much fun about that movie too is that all those scenes backstage. And there's Susie putting on her makeup, and she's also taking vitamins.
Yes.
I love like little things like that. And you know, kids falling on the floor, of course, all of that, again, showy kind of behavior, which you really didn't see as much in New York at that time. Um, there's Viv Albertine in the dressing room, just being so cool and gorgeous.
Did you ever feel the pressure to take on a different name, persona? Like, okay, Angela's done. I am now going to be called blah, blah, blah.
No, I did not.
Okay, because it was so common. The other thing I wanted to ask is, did you ever get tempted to drop a British accent?
Did I ever attempted
a fake,
to?
yeah, a fake accent.
Oh, I did.
Okay.
I'm totally guilty of that.
I would have totally done it too. That's why I had to ask. I'd be like, "Hi, how's it going?" I just have the worst accent, but yeah, you have to.
We did it as a laugh.
Right.
Me and my when she came back from England. But we also did it because we were such Anglophiles. And sometimes we'd put on that accent to like get into a club. Like like hurrahs. I remember I forget who was playing, and we kind of, sort of thought, yeah, because we would do like we didn't get in free everywhere. At a certain point we might have, but we we would do whatever we had to do. You'd climb in through the back window, you put on an accent. And when the stair hits, there is a bit of affectation going on there with the I'm kind of have some some Britishisms, or everything's very the way I'm singing, it's quite enunciated. I don't know.
I'm guilty of that in my current band. I'll just say round. It just sounds better than round. It's like round. You just got to do it.
Well, yeah, I think so. And that's yeah, it's kind of I feel like it's a little corny to think back of myself in that way. But I think that I was always making a little bit of fun of myself too. I mean,
Yeah.
luckily I don't think I took myself too seriously.
Did you ever feel like you had to grow up quicker in a scene like that? Because the film does also document like heroin use and, darker things that were going on in the scene as well.
Yes. Um, yeah, in fact, I had noted that there was kind of a pretty long scene of um, in a bathroom at the Roxy, I think of Keith Levine shooting up. And back then, you never, it's probably speed because, I mean, who knows? Um, that was around. Certainly in New York, I became aware of that a little bit later, and um, it was never really a temptation for me, but it was scary. And it was also, we were all having a drink and being a little bit wild, but I wasn't I remember seeing a woman who had taken too much angel dust and she freaked out on the sidewalk outside of CBGB's, and I it sort of scared the life out of me. That was a bit of a there were points in the diary where you do things happen and they kind of are a wake up call, and suddenly it's like, oh, this is all a lot of fun and a lot's going on, but oh, I think I'm going to go sleep in the bed with my mom tonight. Um, a little bit scary, and of course, New York was filled with crime and guns and murders, and then in London there was all the aggro with the skinheads, which was pers- very pervasive, and that was pretty violent. Um, so these culture wars were creating a lot of fuel for not only the people that were taking photographs or making movies, because, for example, in the punk movie, there's, you see very provocative images, back then, kids with swastikas, all of that. And that was, it was there. It's all on camera. It did happen. Did those kids know what they were doing? Did they care? Hard to hard to say, but that was those all those things were kind of the downside of like, um, you know, or the dark side, let's say, that was this wonderful, energetic scene, but then people were taking drugs, or somebody was kicking somebody's head in, or
Hmm. Yeah, the films, I think, because John made it and because of his prominence in the scene, and also just fascinating that he was like, a punk Rastafarian in the scene. Also, just people trusting him to be like, yeah, you can shoot us. You can film us shooting up. You can film us arguing, like the Slits arguing about, I think it's Tessa's not showing up to play bass. And they're just like, just ragging on her so hard, very fly on the wall. Bands trying to figure out their sounds, Generation X harmonizing backstage while getting dressed and flashing the cameras. You get the sense that everyone is still they're they're just they're still barely, if they're not kids still, they're barely out of being a kid. They're young.
absolutely. And the movie picks up on a lot of the drama that you see when you go out to any kind of scene with bands. There's people that are competitive or snooty, or yeah, it goes with the territory, and it definitely goes with youth and adolescence. Um, when people get older, they don't have so much excuse, but it's it's just thinking about also sort of different thing, but a really great performance in the movie is the Heartbreakers, who
Oh, it's incredible.
the audience is really going wild
Yeah.
when they, which is, they're definitely going pretty wild during Sex Pistols, but that really stood out to me. It's like they loved that, and that was like old school rock and roll.
They're legends already, and they haven't been around that long. It's like, oh my God, we're seeing a New York Doll and his current band.
And, and what is Johnny Thunders thinking as he looks out into that crowd like,
I know.
wow, hey, London is happening. We got to, you know, make sure we keep coming here. I've always been drawn throughout this whole period of my own personal punk research of the audience. And because that's who I was really for most of the time, I have recorded, had bands, but, at that period and even the whole period of the book, I really hadn't been on a stage very much at all. So I was mostly an audience member.
Yeah, but you did jump up on stage at a Clash show. That was pretty awesome. You're like, and then you had quite a bit of cred for a while for like, people are like, hey, you're the person who jumped up on stage at the Clash show. Yes, I am.
Just the other night, I was talking to a guy who used to be in a band called the Invaders, and we were talking about that. And he said, I was there. I remember you jumping up
Yeah,
on the stage.
that's
Wow. I didn't know you were there, and you really remember that? And it wasn't because he read it in the book.
right. Oh my gosh. It is true, though. The audience, the nice thing about the film is you just see people are taking what they want from the scene. Some people are just, they look normal and they're glued to watching the band. Other people are wearing a gimp mask and squirming on the floor. It's just like so polar opposites. It's kind of beautiful.
How about that scene where alternative TV are recording?
Yeah.
And so we're not in the Roxy Club, but suddenly we're in a recording studio, and they've got some guy there who seems to be like, training them a little bit on how to play reggae.
Yes. They're struggling to play
They're
reggae.
they just got to get that beat, and of course I'm not sure if it was Love Lies Limp or whatever, but I do love alternative TV. And they had a genuine love for reggae, like so many bands back then. But that's a great scene.
I also had never heard of Boy. It was a store that I guess Don Letts managed. It was a clothing store, and the police come in to break it up
Yes.
because there's a fake finger and a fake ear in the window, and they come in and confiscate it. Was sex still around when you were in England?
Um, yes, I did go into sex. I'm not sure if it was called seditionaries. I think it was seditionaries at that point.
Okay.
But also, the first shop that Don Letts worked in was with Jeanette Lee from Public Image, and it was Acme Attractions.
Okay.
And then I'm not sure if Acme turned into Boy or Boy was next door. I did go to Boy.
Were those clothes affordable to people? Like, I never have really gotten a sense of what it was like in one of those stores in terms of being a punk potentially wanting to buy something there.
I would say Seditionaries was not cheap.
Okay.
That was a splurge, and I bought a Vive La Rock shirt. I still have it.
Oh, killer.
Um, and of course, now they're like mass produced probably, but I should probably just get a fresh one. It's such a good t-shirt. That was one that you saw a lot of photos of Sid Vicious wearing. The Killer rocks on, it said on the back. I think it
Uh-huh.
was Jerry Lee Lewis. And but that was expensive. And so I only bought one thing, but people would find a way. And I'm sure people were nicking things and
Making their own stuff too, I'm assuming.
yeah, very much so. I mean, another a great place near the King's Road was Beaufort Market, which had it was a mini kind of a mini mall, and that's where polystyrene had a stall. And talk about original creations, that's where she's doing all of these plastic dresses and vinyl, and her fabulous dress with the fried egg and the rashers of bacon, sewn on, and And then my friend Nigel uh, Brickle, he ran Smuts, and but they would change as the styles change. So I remember sometimes people would give you things, and then I was buying clothes and bringing them back and forth to as a courier to when I worked at 99 in and Manic Panic, but more with 99X, Gina Franklin. And she had started Manic Panic with Tish and Snooky. And so, yeah, she would send me over to deliver something to the smut shop, and then he would give me something to bring over there. Uh, things that you could carry, but like, you know, get as many ballet ties in a bag or what have
Oh
you.
my gosh. Yeah, and it's, fashion is moving fast as the music is. I mean, you have, you know, the mod scene, the two-tone scene, the new romantics, everything just it just I don't know where I would have landed if I would have been there then. I think I'd been so confused.
Well, I mean, it really is true that a lot of this happened at the same time. And, the English were always very fashionable and historically. So they didn't really have a hard time going from one look to the next. And you would see that, particularly with punk. And a lot of that would happen because not only would people say, oh, punk's had its day, but they would um, see that they were getting harassed by skinheads, and skinheads were starting fights with Teds. So, oh, we don't want to be part of that group, and
Right.
so let's be let's try out the soul boy look. Get a smart suit, coif your hair so it's not just no more leather jackets for that certain chunk of time. But yeah, they were always a little more fashion conscious than in New York. New York had its fashion look, but I think often it was a little more retro. Um, uh, England, too, I mean, in certain ways, but the punk style was really very, very different initially. But again, the beauty of it was the hodgepodge. You get what you could from your grandmother's, old shoes, and you'd put them together. And that's really how we did it.
Well, the film's amazing because, it does have, like you said, it's got the Heartbreakers in it, and Wayne County and the Electric Chairs, representing the US. Was there a band that like you would have loved to have seen in this film that just was underdocumented and underrepresented?
The film really, it all seems sort of perfect as it is. So it's hard to imagine, oh, it should have been um, Teenage Jesus and the Jerks there, because they wouldn't have been there, because that who was there was Johnny Thunders and, you know,
Right.
more kind of rockers. No, I don't really think so off the top of my head.
Yeah, because I'd never heard of Eater. Was that the band of like they're just like 14 to 16-year-old kids like smashing in a pig's head?
I, He was, yes, that's right. The pig's head. I'd forgotten that scene. I watched it again, the whole thing a few weeks ago. I couldn't believe that scene. It's very long.
Yeah.
Yeah, they had Degenerate. Um, so yeah, Degenerate played the drums. And what's so much fun is seeing now some of these same band members. I mean, somebody like Susie and the Banshees, of course, went on to have a very long career, and they're still doing things. But bands like Eater or the Models or some of these, Cortinas, some of them are still going. And
Wow.
of course, a fair amount of people have passed from this time. That's the sad part. But there've been a lot of reunions.
Yeah.
Look at Gang of Four touring right now.
Yep.
Different members, but going strong. I hear the shows have been great. Um, but you know, I think it was really interesting just to think about Don Letts as a DJ, house DJ at the Roxy, Dread, bringing all this reggae in, turning had to have been said, turning people like John Lydon and Ari up onto reggae.
Right.
And then you've also got the people that ran. the that ran the Roxy. So this was interesting. It was a guy named Andy Tchaikovsky, Susan Carrington, and Barry Jones, who I did meet. He was in a band called the Idols. But the Andrew Kozowski and Susan Carrington had a very they always looked fantastic back then, and had very sort of memorable um clothes, just a stylish older couple, like kind of like Vivian Westwood and Malcolm McLaren. Now, I was just in London not long ago, and there was a place in Soho. I was doing a book event with Thurston Moore, which was great. And it just happened that night there was the Rock and Roll Library right off Denmark Street. It's a famous street that sells musical instruments. And so a lot of the people who came to my thing went to this Rock and Roll Library where Mick Jones housed his own incredible collection of Clash stuff and ephemera, video cassettes. Really amazing. And it was so funny. He was there and he was getting a lot of pictures taken with him. And I saw him, and I was, I had a lot going on that night, but I felt too shy. And I
Uh-huh.
wish I'd been like, oh, let me have my picture taken with you. But I followed them on the social media, and it showed all the people who came up to them during this couple of weeks, that this exhibition was up, and Viv Albertine came, and one of the people that came were Andy Tchaikovsky and Susan Carrington, and there's a photo of them at this current exhibition, and they look fantastic, in their 70s and stylish as ever. But it was really fun to see that. Like those guys ran the Roxy,
Yeah.
But the White Riot tour, and the photos that were taken on that tour, and actually Bob Gruen was in town because he those were some of the early photos that just opened this world to me.
Okay.
On the tour bus, you had Subway Sect, the Slits, the Clash, um, Buzzcocks.
Amazing.
The Sex Pistols might have joined that tour at a certain point, but fantastic footage of Ari up sitting there with Joe Strummer, listening to reggae on a boot, kind of a big tape recorder, let's
Yeah, it's
say.
great.
That was fantastic.
Yeah, it's really amazing. And the on the White Riot tour in the Slits documentary, them basically saying, yeah, often, the Clash could get a hotel room, but they would stop us,
Oh yeah.
for women who looked dangerous, and to be like, no, we can't allow them into the hotel. We can't allow them into the restaurant. Really amazing documentation that Don got in this film.
Right. And thank God, because all of that is important. And we can watch it today and look at it now and uh, reflect on what it was, but also how it has uh, influenced music and what its relevance today might be. Which I think I think there is some uh, thread that one could take from those times, which is about creativity and about energy and about questioning things and um, going your own way. Being individualistic, which is not an easy thing to do. It wasn't then, it still isn't really, maybe a little bit easier today, but I don't know. Um, I, but I do feel like, yeah, just grateful that that's out there.
Again, I'm an excitable person, but I really was very your book was a page turner, and I just really felt kinship. There's certain things where you see certain movies or you read certain books and you're like, oh, I think I would have been friends with this person. And I know if I'd been in New York, I would have been like, I gotta meet Angela. I got to be her roadie. That is the roadie of Teenage Jesus and the Jerks. I'll be her roadie so she can roadie for them. So that's what I would do for you.
Oh, I think we could be friends too.
Yes, now we're friends. I don't even have to go back. I can be like, yes, I was there.
Total pleasure.
Well, at the end of every episode, I ask the same question, but I tailor it depending on the film we're talking about. So on a scale from staying out till midnight being the lowest to staying out till 8 a.m. the following morning being the highest, what would you give the Punk movie on a scale from staying out only till midnight to staying out till 8 a.m. the following morning?
Ooh, midnight to 8 in the morning. I think I would say it's a good 6.
6
Yeah.
a.m.?
I think 6 a.m.
You're totally right on. It's a 6 a.m. film. We don't even know how much time has passed outside because we're in a concrete room. Everyone is staying. We're talking. We go outside. Sun's coming up. We got to find a diner.
Yeah, and you need your sunglasses too.
That's right. Thank you for listening to Revolutions Per Movie. We release new episodes every Thursday on your favorite podcast app and additional bonus episodes every Sunday on our Patreon. The show is a completely independent affair, so the best way to support the show is through our Patreon at patreon.com/revolutionspermovie, where you can get weekly bonus episodes and shows, exclusive limited edition flexi discs and records and CDs featuring guests that have appeared on the show, and other exclusive goods sent to you just for joining. You can follow us on social media at Revolutions Per Movie and also find out more information about our various guests in the episode show notes. Thanks again, and we'll see you next week. Bye!